Chapter 17 Daydreamers Part 1 Hagrid Hagrid had been anxious and stressed many times in his life. He had lived through the terror of Grindelwald and you-know-who both. He had been expelled, had his wand snapped and lost almost everything when his hut was blasted into another world. Then he'd had to start his life over at the age of 64. He was not a young man anymore, basically ancient to most here in Westeros, and he hadn't had a family since his dad died over 50 years ago. Today was one of those days he felt a strain on his shoulders all too well. Even the dragons couldn't cheer him up. Hagrid aimed his pink umbrella and used the volcano spell to cover the area in its odor, making the young dragons ecstatic. At present, Hagrid was in charge of the horse-sized black dragon Ebryon, the grey Stormcloud, copper-shaded Morgul, silver-coloured Thunderstrike, and the pink little hatchling Morning. Hagrid thought Ebryon was getting too big for the dragon daycare, so Rhaena might have to bring her back to Driftmark soon, and if she went, Bela and Moondancer might go too. It'd be sad to not have them around the castle, but better to spread the dragons out. Dragonstone was a good place for dragons to roam, but it had a limited amount of space, especially when some of the inhabitants were the size of the Cannibal, Vhagar, Caraxes, Silverwing and Sheepstealer. Hagrid hooked his umbrella wands back on his belt, thinking of how Dumbledore had never believed him guilty of that horrible business with the Chamber. It had been Tom Riddle, the man who'd become the Dark Lord a couple decades later. Dumbledore had always fought Hagrid's expulsion and injustice, and saved him at his most helpless. Homeless, parentless, and with no future, while everyone else had looked away. So after giving him his hut and a position as gamekeeper's assistant, the brilliant man had repaired Hagrid's broken wand too. It only needed a simple reparo, a second-year spell, as if Hagrid's wand was no more difficult to mend than a chipped teacup. It did not change the sting of his expulsion. He would never graduate, but at least had been given access to his dear wand again. Dumbledore had then disguised it as a pink umbrella, winked and said, "Only for emergencies, Hagrid." "Well, this was an emergency, wasn't it, Dumbledore? Hariel and Norbert, both of them gone!" She'd flown off at dawn days ago and hadn't been seen since. When they didn't return that night and everyone at Dragonstone realized she was missing, Damon flew to King's Landing the next day, checking if Hariel and Norbert had been delayed there and why, seeing as neither of them were fond of the place. She'd never chain Norbert just to stop by a castle. Damon had come back empty-handed though. Not only wasn't Hariel there, but no guard, servant, maid, noble or royal had spotted her flying near the Red Keep at all. Wherever they'd flown off to, it hadn't been one of their usual trips around the capital. There had been several searches since. Daemon, Laenor, Rhaenys, Aegon, Aemond, even sweet Princess Helena had just arrived at Dragonstone, having been out looking for Hariel all day. Hagrid had wanted to have faith in her, because even if Hariel wasn't back, neither was Norbert, so that meant they were together, didn't it? Hariel was tough. She was the girl who lived, the savior of the wizarding world, and James and Lily's kid. She'd survived those blasted Dursleys. She'd proven how capable she was every day since they arrived in Essos, facing whatever challenges was thrown their way. Hagrid knew he would have sunk without her too during those first few months in Essos, but knowing Hariel was there, trusting and relying on him to make things better, had given him the strength to not give up. He'd seen so much of his younger self in her then. Hariel had been homeless, parentless, with no future either, and now expecting Hagrid to be her Dumbledore, though with no idea how flat he fell in comparison. Yet it had been what had gotten him out of bed each morning, knowing she'd be there, expecting him to keep fighting. He'd have many pets over his life, known countless children at Hogwarts, but Hariel was the closest he'd ever get to a kid of his own. No matter her blood, she was family. And she was gone! What if Hariel's wand had snapped? Had she brought along a unicorn hand from his trunk this time? What if she was injured somewhere and couldn't get back up on Norbert? What if Hariel had fallen off Norbert? Fortunately, his spiraling thoughts were sidetracked by an unexpected visitor. "Princess Helena, what are you doing here?" He'd seen her arrive half an hour before, but assumed the princess would go straight to the castle after Dreamfire was settled, not come down here to the dragon daycare. Disheveled and drenched, she hadn't even changed from her flying attire. I did not find Hariel. Oh right, I heard. Thank you for trying though. Where exactly did you fly? I searched the air over the Crownlands in the Narrow Sea, Helena answered. You should have gone north. North? Helena said, bewildered. Why would she fly there? Don't know why, but that's the direction Hariel is. Hagrid walked over to show the princess the navigator compass. The uncertainty had driven Hagrid stir-crazy. He needed to know she was alive. So Hagrid had spent most of the day turning the interior of his expandable chest inside out for this compass. Back when he was tasked to give her the Hogwarts letter, Hagrid had gone looking for Hariel with that instrument which Dumbledore lent him. Hagrid thought he'd given the compass back, except he suspected he'd glimpsed it during their mad packing spree the night they'd been chased out of the fishing town in Essos. It wasn't anything fancy, a magical compass that pointed at what one was searching for. It would require a sample of the target, and then the arrow would point towards its source. If one was looking for their lost dog, you put a hair from the dog in. One could use a cat hair, or a bird feather, or a twig from a broom, a leaf from a plant, or a human hair. It could easily be fooled for. A simple masking charm would throw it off, so it hadn't worked while Hariel was at Privet Drive, but it had started working when the Dursleys had tried to hide her somewhere else. It's how he found her in that hut on the rock on her 11th birthday. Hagrid could have gotten there sooner in the day. It'd probably have frightened Hariel less. But he needed to finish her birthday cake, didn't he? Eventually, Hagrid found the navigator compass in a box of dried kelpie seaweed, of all the places. He pushed in one of Hariel's hairs from her hairbrush, and felt 100 tons lighter when the needle started turning. Since then, the needle had remained rock still pointed north, maybe a little bit westwards too. You see the arrow? It's pointed at Hariel. If one flies in this direction long enough, that's where she'll be. He gave her the compass and demonstrated how it worked. This is astonishing. I've never seen anything akin to it, Helena said, turning the compass around and watching as the arrow stayed true towards its source. This means Hariel may be somewhere in the Vale, or Northern Riverlands perhaps. Or the North. The dragons never fly that far unless ordered. They don't like the cold, not even in summer. Aye, but nobody's not like you dragons. Back home, Swedish snow snouts lived on cold mountaintops where there's snow nearly all year round, far away from humans. The north might be closer to home for her than this volcano. She sure hates the smell here. Helena's expression became troubled. I am regretful, Rubius. I can see you are deeply worried, but I cannot fly north without leave from my father. It's much too far to fly in one trip and I cannot travel alone. But Dreamfire will not allow me to bring a knight. She has little patience for carrying passengers compared to her fellow dragon brethren, Helena said, twisting her hands worriedly. We will tell Sir Lenor or Prince Damon when they return, though. They can go. Yeah, I figured. Besides, you just arrived, Princess. You should get to the castle for some food and sleep. I will, Helena murmured, and handed the compass back. Why did you not inform of this sooner? If accurate, I believe my brother and Princess Renice flew off in the wrong directions. I did not know I had it before today. I had to search for a while, and when I found it, all the dragon riders were already out, while the ones left can't go. Hagrid sighed. Princess Rhaenyra couldn't go flying in her condition, pregnant with what Hagrid thought might be twins, while her sons and the twins didn't have dragons large enough for this. Dang it! If Hagrid only had Sirius's old motorbike, then he could have flown out himself, couldn't he? He always got nauseous riding at great speeds when he wasn't in control, like those blasted Gringotts carts. But it was different when he could steer himself. He didn't get sick then. He did no good longing for what was gone though. Did nothing good but make him sad and mad. Here there was no motorbike that could take his weight in flying wherever he wanted. No. Here there were only dragons. There was a raven, Helena muttered, looking somewhere next to Hagrid's arm. It was lost in a storm. No wonder. The weather's getting worse. Sure, many ravens get lost in such conditions. I'm surprised more of you aren't back, actually. But then, Princess Rhaenyra had mentioned something about this, hadn't she? The princess suspected most of the dragon riders were being hosted by noble houses through Westeros this night. Like Princess Rhaenys, who would be spending the night at Storm's End, her mother's family, after searching above the Stormlands for Hariel. The raven was in my dream, Helena corrected. I dream sometimes, and I've been wondering for a while if... The princess trailed off, acting pretty uncomfortable. She fidgeted with her hands and glanced nervously towards the other dragon handlers across the room. Eno was talking with the new recruit, and the guard who escorted Helena in was by the door, covering a yawn. I wonder, are there dreamers back in your lands, Rubius Hagrid? Sure. I dream most of the nights myself, little princess. Except those nights I just black out and don't remember a single thing. Helena smiled, but it was a sad thing. I mean dragon dreams. Oh, you mean seeing the future in visions and stuff? Sure, I had plenty of them back home. Most had a chance to learn the subject, but few were truly gifted in info. He suddenly realized what she was hinting at. You have visions, princess? I think I do. I have these dreams at times, Helena said. Strange, bewildering, and not always when I sleep either, but they feel like they are true. Oh? Hagrid asked. It must sound odd to you. Not at all, princess. Look who you're talking to. Helena looked at him then, reacting as if it was truly the first time she'd noticed Hagrid's differences. Bless her, but she was a rare one, wasn't she? Hagrid always liked Princess Helena best of the dragon bunch, who followed spiders down the hallway and listened with rapt attention to his stories of Aragog's life from an egg to meeting his wife Mozak. Why do the dreams worry you? Why do you think them true? It is hard to explain. My family doesn't understand it either, but Aemon suggested I ask you and Hariel about the matter. Helena sat down at a rocky black boulder, smoothing out her skirts as she spoke. Sometimes I have what I think others may regard as normal dreams, which have little rhyme or meaning. But then there will be other nights, or even waking moments, where a dream will come to me. This time the images in my head feels different. I was on Driftmark the first time I saw a raven fly into a storm, and it felt significant, but I could not give a reasonable argument for why. Helena said, her cheeks flushed and her voice tight. It flew into a storm and it was lost, and I saw it land in sharp pieces of broken shells. The trouble is, I did not know what it meant. Then after I learned Hariel and Norbert were missing, I had the sensation that the dream had come to pass. However, that vagueness is how it often is. It's all symbolism and I require hindsight to understand. So you're a seer, Hagrid summarized, nodding along. That was pretty interesting, but not really his main concern. Not with Hariel missing at all. But what else could he do? Hagrid wasn't being of any help in finding Hariel, but maybe he could help Helena. A what? A seer. Someone who can see the future. You've got an inner eye. We have several names for it back home. Helena bit her lip. I'm not sure. Some of the members of House Targaryen are blessed with dragon dreams. They give us warnings of things to come. But what I see is always so confusing. Sounds like a typical seer to me, Hagrid said with a nod, sitting down on the ground next to Helena's boulder. It put them at about the same eye line. There was a witch I knew back home, Trelawney. I think she saw a fair bit but kept misunderstanding everything she saw. She came down to me hut once, all scared and worried, telling me to be on guard since I was doomed to get trapped in the jaws of a beast. I worked with a bunch of animals, so I asked which one, but she couldn't say, so I blew off her warning but next month I got my puppy Fang, and he was a bit of a biter in the beginning. Hagrid chortled. Why do you think I named him Fang, eh? Helena's lips twitched, making a short giggle sound, but didn't look up from her lap. My dream is why I joined the search. Of course I'm driven by fear for Ariel's well-being as well, but Mother did not want me to go in such weather. Yet I had this feeling Ariel is a raven lost in storms. If I could prove this one was true, then all the others might be as well. I need to know. Why do you think Ariel was the raven though? Hagrid hummed. Is it the raven black hair? Or because she's a flyer? Maybe raven isn't the worst pick of animal to describe her. Elena's face fell. I could not tell for sure. I still do not understand all of that dream. Even if I'm right about Ariel being the lost raven, I do not understand the rest. Storm? The broken shells? What is the meaning of seeing something that will happen in the future when it can only be understood in hindsight? What good are warnings of dangers when it can never be changed? Elena shook her head, a trembling hand massaging her temple. It'll be alright. You're not the first to have had this struggle, Princess. It is a difficult thing, seeing beyond the rest of us. And you know, ravens are common to see in divination. Hagrid suddenly remembered. They're all over the books and stuff. They've got a bad reputation since some think of them like dark omens for loss or death. But they're dead clever. Tough and talking birds. Very misunderstood creatures ravens are. He scratched his jaw thoughtfully. I may actually have a book that covers some seer stuff. It'll be in English though. The idea of translating the book to common tongue made him grimace. But if it had helped sweet but confused Helena understand her visions better, he needed to try. It could be mentally straining for seers to not understand their own minds. It would be for anyone. You do? Yeah, I'll look for it, see if I can translate a few pages. But not now, alright? With Ariel and Norbert gone, I just can't. Hagrid choked up, his bottom lip wobbling as a rush of fear overcame him again. Ariel is very fortunate to have someone who cares as much as you do, Helena remarked wistfully. No, it was Hagrid who was fortunate to have Ariel, and though Helena had distracted him for a little while, the fear returned with a vengeance. Hagrid glanced at the compass, and then over at the Dragon Daycare where Morning and Thunderstrike were spitting sparks at each other's faces. He needed to do something. He couldn't just sit and wait anymore. But what could Hagrid do? What would Dumbledore have done? Well, come to think of it, he'd probably have given Hagrid a useful trinket, some wise advice, and sent him along to do the job. So instead, perhaps what Hagrid should ask was, what would Ariel have done? Daydreamers Part 2. Ariel. Ariel peeked her head out of the door, but had no idea which direction to go. It was dawn and the hallway was empty with only a cold draft passing by, but Ariel really needed help with her dress. She couldn't reach the fastening along the back, and it was hard to charm what she couldn't see. Ariel would hate to tear apart a borrowed gown not even a full day after she arrived. Her first day at Winterfell had been spent settling Norbert in the biggest courtyard of the castle with Cregan and Ellard. After days on the road, she hadn't expected them to stay outside longer than necessary, but she was not so secretly pleased they did. We could not call ourselves true Northmen if we left a sovereign maiden by her lonesome to the cold while we huddled inside, Cregan said lightly. Any true Northman knows it's common sense to seek the nearest warm hearth whenever available, Ellard had muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes. The remark was meant for Cregan alone, but Ariel overheard, and ducked her head to hide her smile. Almost giddy to realize Cregan was out here because he wanted to, not because he was required to. They'd ended up sharing a snow picnic next to her dragon with flowing bluebell flames for heat, and Ariel had demonstrated all the tricks she could make Norbert comply to as dining entertainment. Cregan had been very impressed, especially when Ariel convinced Norbert to let him touch her. His hand had been steady when it rested against Norbert's neck, scratching a spot according to Hariel's instructions, but his breath was shaky, visible on the air itself by the condensation for each quick exhale, and his face displayed a boyish wonder. Hariel found herself wondering how he'd react if she took him flying. Not that she could yet, but the image stuck. However, all of it made it so Hariel didn't have a chance to get familiar with Winterfell, or where to find a helping hand. Hariel could have sworn she'd heard footsteps fall, and after a short wait her saving grace came walking up the hall. Cregan's half-sister Sarah Snow turned the corner alongside Jenny, the same maid who'd come in with firewood the day before, and been confused when she returned in the evening and the fire just kept burning without requiring more wood. "Good morning, Lady Hariel," Sarah greeted, criminally chipper for the crack of dawn. "Good morning, Lady Sarah." "I'm no lady," the girl insisted. "Just Sarah." "Then you should use just Hariel for me," Hale grinned, and glanced to Jenny. "Good morning, Jenny. The braid suits you very well," she said, noticing you must have put some effort into it. The maid flushed as Hariel turned back to Sarah with a hopeful smile. "May I ask you for a favor, Sarah?" "I'd be happy to be of assistance." Hariel held the door ajar to let them through. Sarah to help, and Jenny seemed to have already been coming to her chamber with a purpose. "The fireplace, it's still burning," Jenny murmured, glancing from the logs in her arm to the crackling flames. "Thank you for the consideration, but I told you yesterday I wouldn't need any logs for the fire. I kept it running through the night," Hariel said and glanced to Sarah. "I hope you don't mind I used magic. Will the fire stay inside the fireplace?" "Of course. Once the magic runs out, the fireplace will be back to normal." "Then I do not see why anyone would mind. It saves us the fire logs," Sarah said, far more excited compared to Jenny's wariness. "Is this akin to the lantern you gifted Cregan? Or the blue fire from the courtyard? Can we touch this fire the same way as that one?" "No," Hale said quickly, stepping in front of the fireplace just in case. "This is normal fire and it'll burn you if you stick your hand in it." "Then I will refrain from doing so," Sarah agreed seriously. "How may I be of assistance, Lady Hariel?" "Just Hariel," she corrected absently, and turned around to show the mess she'd made of the string closure along the gown's back. In minutes, Sarah looped and tightened the gown correctly. Including the undershirt, stockings and several layers of fabric, it was the heaviest gown Hariel thought she'd ever worn, but once she got used to the weight she appreciated the warmth. "Lady Margaret was a woman grown and mother-made, so she had a bigger bust than you. It's a bit roomy," Sarah mused, glancing at the excess fabric over Hariel's shoulders. "I can sew it in for you after we've broken our fast, my lady." "I told you, call me Hariel, and thank you for the offer, Sarah, but it won't be necessary. It's only a loan." Next, Sarah volunteered to wrestle Hariel's stubborn raven hair into a similar hairstyle as the northern women wore around here. The top of her hair pulled back in a braid, leaving the rest to flow free. Hariel had a small mirror placed in her solar, barely larger than a square-hand mirror, so she used an Engorgio charm to see the end result better, grinning amused when she realized the northern gowns made her look more a witch than a lady. In the meanwhile, Sarah had to sit down to get her bearings back from the display of magic, but once she calmed down, and on several twirls herself in front of the floor-length mirror, they headed down for breakfast together. The household of Winterfell ate their meals together in the Great Hall, and Hariel would never have found it without Sarah. The majority eating their morning meals were perfect strangers, and when they arrived the quiet chatter broke off. The curious attention was almost like her first day at Driftmark, except with a lot more fur around and no Hagrid to take the attention of her. She found Cregan along the head table, nicely cleaned up from the road and sitting next to Ellard. When she smiled, he returned it warmly, stormy eyes crinkling, and then looked her up and down. Did he think she looked pretty? Bathed, freshly changed and rested up? This was the most presentable she'd ever been in front of him. Hariel was technically Cregan's guest, but his wasn't the table end Sarah directed her to. "Lady Hariel, I hope the night treated you well. You look refreshed, Lady Eliza said as Harriel was escorted to a seat on the bench opposite the older woman. Harriel was not surprised but still disappointed when Sarah turned right around and went to sit at one of the lower tables. Harriel would rather have spent the meal with Sarah than Liza. Thank you, Lady Liza, I did, Harriel said. I hope you've slept well? I've had better, Liza drawled. There's a dragon in my courtyard. Harriel had not expected her dry retort, and a burst of laughter came before she could stop it. My apologies, Lady Liza. I did not intend to make light of your unease. It's perfectly understandable. Harriel covered her mouth with her hand, embarrassed. I worry I've grown too accustomed to the presence of nearby dragons on Dragonstone, wild and tame alike. I forget myself. Fortunately, Liza let it go. I will be fine. You are both guests of my grandson and I watched you handle the dragon all yesterday afternoon. The Maester concluded you have a very good control of Norbert, which put me at ease. He studied dragons in the capital while earning his Valyrian steel link on his Maester's chain, so he knows them very well. It was nice she'd been able to calm people down about Norbert, but at the same time, what did the Maester truly know? Maester Geraldis had a Valyrian steel link as well, proving he'd studied the higher mysteries according to the directives of the Order at the Citadel. He lived on Dragonstone too, and yet didn't know half as much about dragons as the dragon handlers. As far as Harriel was concerned, they were the only true Maesters in the higher mysteries. Reading was well and good, but one couldn't truly master anything one didn't practice. Even a bookworm like Hermione would agree. If there's anything you need, let the maid or steward Tobin know, and they will see it done, Lady Eliza said firmly, gesturing towards the table beside theirs, where a short, bald man gave Harriel a firm nod. She guessed it was Tobin then. Do you have any plans for your stay? Cregan didn't say, but how long do you intend to visit? I've not a set date, but I plan to remain until Lord Cregan is formally installed as Lord of Winterfell at least. Do you know if he will combine it with the Name Day feast? Princess Rhaenyra will want to hear of it. She has never been further north than the Vale. The details aren't sorted out yet. It takes some time to prepare for such events in winter, Liza said, using a spoon to crack open the shell of the boiled egg on her plate. For one, the men have to hold a hunt. It's tradition for the new lord to lead his own hunt when he takes over. Then why did they not go before the trip to Castle Hornwood? Harriel asked politely. It's been a busy few moons since winter started. Our first priority was repurposing the castle functions and restocking before it got too cold, Lady Eliza said. The weather took a turn for the worse last night too, so it might be unsafe to venture into the Wolfswood now. Ah, I understand. Harriel smiled. Then let me know if I can be of any assistance. How would you assist with a hunt? Liza's tone was pretty patronizing, but her expression was confused enough Harriel thought the older woman genuinely couldn't understand it. I have a dragon, Harriel replied bluntly, probably sounding just as patronizing. They're good hunters. Liza's expression faltered. Of course. She'd been stating a fact, but that might have sounded threatening too, so Harriel pushed the conversation onwards. I'm going to see Norbert after the meal, but afterwards I hoped someone could show me around Winterfell. Yesterday I was too busy during the daylight hours to see more than the courtyard and the Great Keep, but Winterfell is so much more. I'll see to it, though I believe Cregan had plans to do so already. Liza glanced up at the table to where Cregan was leaning forwards, speaking with his uncle across from him, hushed and tense. When Harriel turned back to Liza, she avoided further conversation by quickly putting a piece of hard-boiled egg into her mouth. Going for a tour of Winterfell with Cregan wasn't as simple as Harriel hoped. As an unmarried maiden, polite society dictated Harriel went with a chaperone, in this case, 2 of them. Harriel didn't mind Sarah and Stuart Tobin tagging along. Both were people Harriel would like to get to know better. It was just a bit uncomfortable knowing why they were tailing them. Harriel was familiar with the practice though. She just hoped this would be one of the differences between the Crownlands and the North. But alas. Besides Uncle Bernard and his sons, we have other Stark cousins too. They're distantly related, but still descendants through the male line from Branston Stark, second Lord of Winterfell after foreign Stark knelt to Aegon the Conqueror. They still carry the name Stark, but hold no lands and live here in Winterfell in the First Keep. Cregan told Hariel as they walked past the building. A multi-story shell keep connected to a very tall tower. The building was humble compared to the Great Keep, but still a massive construction. Is Doran Stark was the head of their household. You may have seen him this morning in the Great Hall. He was the tall, lanky man with the curly moustache. His wife's name is Joclyn. She was the very pregnant one. They have a 2-year-old daughter and expecting their second child any day now. Cregan explains. Am I boring you with a lesson on House Stark yet? No, not at all. I was wondering who everyone is, and this has been helpful. Your distant Stark cousins all live here? She gestured at the tall stone building. The extended Stark family basically had a keep of their own. Cregan smiled. This is also the oldest surviving part of Winterfell, and the tower it's connected to is the tallest watchtower. I can tell it's been built differently from the Great Keep, Hariel murmured. The brick sizes and patterns were different. Tobin and Sarah caught up with him while they were discussing the First Keep, huddled into furs and in Tobin's case, a bit unsteady. Perhaps Lady Hariel would enjoy seeing the glass gardens next? The steward suggested hopefully. A good suggestion. It'll be warmer, Cregan said. Lead the way, my lord. The glass gardens were impressive, but didn't look like anything like the Hogwarts greenhouses the way Hariel had hoped. For one, none of the plants were trying to escape their pots, but it wasn't like anything she'd seen in this world either. They were unexpectedly large, but considering the size of Winterfell, they needed to be. Warm and humid, with a thick scent in the air. The gardens were bathed in tinted light from the green and yellow glass panes. We have gardeners in charge of maintaining the fruits, vegetables, herbs and flowers, Cregan said. Like the rest of the castle, the gardens are warmed by the hot springs underneath, but very little air escapes, leaving the glass gardens the warmest rooms in Winterfell regardless of the season. It's a wonder, isn't it? Tobin looked around the garden proudly. Here, during the bitter days of winter, the glass garden would be worth more than any vault brimming with gold and gems in Casterly Rock. The Lannisters might claim otherwise, but one couldn't actually eat gold. It is. Hale removed her gloves, scarf and hat, pushing it into her pockets. She was shown the vegetable patches which took up most of the entrance area, and the plants varied the further in they walked, passing the smelly herb garden to the fruit plants and the flowers. They are winter roses, Sarah explained, noticing where Hariel's eyes were resting. There was a rich assortment of lovely flowers in their beds, but the blue-shaded roses stood out for their unusualness. So blue. I've never seen them before. All the roses on Dragonstone are red. It is an uncommon flower. With the exception of Winterfell, I only know of a couple houses in the Vale who've been able to grow them as well, Cregan said, taking a knife from his pocket, inspecting the blue roses, and reached for a particular healthy-looking one. They're as rare as they are beautiful. He cut the rose by the stem and turned to Hariel. I can't think of many flowers more suitable for someone as unique as you. Thank you, Hariel said, the hands brushing when she accepted it, and suddenly finding it a challenge to breathe normally. The humidity must be getting to her. Sarah cleared her throat. Are you looking forward to the feast, Lady Hariel? She said hurriedly. Just Hariel, she corrected absently, turning reluctantly from Cregan just as Sarah looked away from her brother too. Had she been glaring? Yes, I'm looking forward to it. You'll be there too, will you not? I think we'll need all the help I can get with keeping so many new names straight, Hariel said, worried Sarah might be excluded because of her bastard status. She would have been in the south. I will. She will, Sarah and Cregan answered at the same time. It's a big day for my lord brother and a day to celebrate, Sarah insisted. Mother is helping me sew in one of her old dresses. I've been growing so much lately, all my old ones are too small. Your mother lives here too? Ariel blurted, unthinkably, and regretted it the moment the words were out of her mouth. Crap, they had different mothers. Sarah hesitated. No. She's in Wintertown, but I stay here at Winterfell to serve Lady Liza. With so many boys, I'm sure she's glad to have her only granddaughter close. Ariel mused, and then looked to Kraken. I have it right, don't I? Sarah is the only girl? She is, he confirmed. I believe Lady Liza was mistaken about you, though, Sarah said carefully. How so? She said Southerners had less regard for bastards, that it was in your faith and not just the law, Kraken explained. We were warned you may not have much regard for Sarah because of it. I think you're confusing her, Sarah giggled. In grandmother's defense, she's rarely mistaken on these matters, Kraken mused. She is almost a Southerner herself, after all. I thought House Locke was in the north, Ariel asked. Yes, but nearly as far south as you can get in the north. She had a niece from House Manderley who followed the Seven, Kraken said wryly, as if it was ludicrous. Tommen cleared his throat, not so subtly, and Kraken straightened at once. No disrespect meant, she was a true noble lady. But I am not a true Southerner, Ariel said, inspecting her flower while she talked. I live there, but it's not where I was born, and it's impossible to place Britain on a map. It could be in the skies for all anyone has been able to figure out. Why do you think I'm still in Westeros? If I could go home... Ariel trailed off, leaving it unspoken. Where I am from, illegitimate children inherit their father's family name just as trueborn children do, and any shame from infidelity falls on the shoulder of the unfaithful parent alone, not a child. That had their interest piqued, if only for how radical it probably sounded. Truly? Sarah asked quietly. Yes, I knew a boy back home named Dean Thomas. His father disappeared before his parents married, and then his mother married another soon after he was born. He later got 4 younger half-sisters, but they were one family. He referred to his stepfather as Dad because the man raised Dean as his own. His last name, Thomas, was actually the name of his stepfather. What? Kraken asked. That isn't possible. Not here, but it was back home. You had to, come with a petition to the ruling government to be allowed to take another child into your family. But if it was approved, the child could become the foster parent's offspring by law, of equal standing as any children of the blood. Why would anyone do that? In the case of Dean, to make him happy, Ariel said, looking at Kraken amused. To make him feel secure, included and loved by his closest kin. Though for others, I don't know all the reasons. Some couples were not able to have a child for one reason or another, so they take in a child who lacked a parent instead, making a family of affection. Was it akin to taking on an apprentice? Stuart Toppin said, a tone of revelation. So the child could take over the family business when the parents became too old or injured for the labor. I would not use the word apprentice. They were regarded as sons and daughters, but in a way, yes. Most of the children would take care of their lawful parents if they got sick by age 2, Ariel answered. The half-siblings looked at each other with startled expressions, and Ariel kept clarifying. I'm not claiming all situations worked out so harmoniously as with Dean Thomas. Not everyone wants to raise another child, and when I was told of the situation it wasn't strange to me the way I think the tale sounds to you. Dean wondered very much who his father had been though, because he was like me. What do you mean? Dean Thomas could use magic like I do, but his mother and sisters could not. When he learned he was a wizard, he wondered if he got it from his lost father. Learned? Did he not always know? Kraken wondered. Ariel chuckled. You would be surprised how many have magic and do not know it. If it's never practiced, it'll remain an unused muscle, like someone with a natural talent to be a great singer but who's never thought to sing, or a gifted swordsman who's never owned a sword.
The winter chill felt even more bitter after the humid heat of the greenhouses, though Kraken gallantly offered Hariel his armor for assistance again, working both as a support device so Hariel didn't slip on the ice patches and fall on her arse, and also as a wall against the wind. At the same time, Hariel had noticed something unspoken was going on between the siblings. Sarah had been giving her brother pointed looks, and whatever it meant made Kraken annoyed. She didn't find out before the end of the tour though, while they were walking under the covered bridge between the Ravenry and the Bell Tower, and Kraken sent their chaperones ahead. "We'll join you shortly. Go ahead. I know how busy you are, Tobin." Hariel watched them leave, feeling they'd been sent on their way for more than their convenience. "I want to have a word about the feast. It'll be in 3 days. "What about the hunt?" "If the weather allows it, we'll leave early tomorrow, but the feast will happen regardless of the hunt. I've been on countless hunts before and led several of them myself. It's a valued skill, but not a tradition so rigidly sacred will risk fingers and toes when it can easily be moved to a more practical date." "And your uncle?" Harold glanced around, but couldn't think of how anyone could overhear them here. They were in the middle of a raised walkway, and sure, plenty could possibly see them, but listening was nigh impossible unless someone was under an invisibility cloak nearby. "Has he agreed to your terms?" "Partially. He's not officially stepped down as regent, but he hasn't been able to prevent the feast from going ahead, nor that I claimed ice." "What ice?" Hariel asked, noticing the small icicles dangling from the overhang of the bridge. Amused, Kraken followed her sideline. "Ice is the name of the ancestral greatsword of my house." "A sword? And your uncle returned it?" "No, Bernard never had it. That would be the same as declaring his intentions to usurp me. It's only wielded by the Lord of Winterfell and has been on the mantle since my father died." Kraken leaned against the bridge railing facing the barracks while a longer pause lingered between them, giving Hariel the feeling he was uncertain what to say, or how to say it. "With winter, my uncle argues, and several of my family agrees, that I need to secure my line sooner rather than later." Hariel knew that was just a roundabout way of saying, "I need to get married and have a kid." "That until I do, it's for the betterment of the North's stability that Bernard remains regent, but that we'll share duties until spring or I have an heir, whichever comes first." "I see," she said, though in truth she was uncertain what was happening here. What do you deem best?" "It should not matter. I may be young and untested, but Winterfell is my birthright, and Bernard's only a second son, though he is my heir until I have an heir of my own. When my wedding takes place should not matter, and I will not have him use the threat of winter to cling onto my rightful station." "You speak sense. It's prudent to be mindful in hard times, but it is difficult to believe the situation will get easier come spring. Who knows when that will be? If Bernard has sat as regent for half a decade or more before you take your place, it may be worse," Hariel said. "I'm aware. I'm going to make Bernard and my cousins swear fealty to me as their liege lord on my name day feast in front of Winterfell." "Then I will back you," Hariel said thoughtfully. There was another stretched silence, where Kraken turned from watching the barracks to facing her. "I am grateful for your support, Lady Hariel. Yours and Norbert's presence in Winterfell has had a large impact." He took a deep breath, his expression closing up. "At the same time, I need to ask, what do you expect in return?" The question put Hariel on the spot. She'd not expected it, though she should have. She knew most would not get involved in foreign succession issues without expecting reward, but all Hariel could think to say was, "Dinner?" "What?" Dinner?" Kraken was not following her train of thoughts. "Tobin has been going on all moon about Winterfell's special roasted goat for the feasts, so I was hoping for... dinner?" Kraken covered his mouth with his gloved hand, his eyes crinkling as he began to laugh. Hariel sniggered. She wasn't sure what was so funny, but there was a nervous, almost jittery tension in the air, and whenever she caught his eyes, Hariel found herself cracking up. When they got a hold of themselves, Kraken was left grinning, looking younger and more boyish, his expression almost fond. "You must hear this all the time, but you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen." Ariel flushed. It was a compliment she got fairly often, but seemed more meaningful coming from a boy she wanted to think that way of her. Cregan reached out, adjusting up her hat so he could see her face better. "Besides dinner," Cregan said, his voice low and his eyes flickering to her mouth when she moistened them. "That's all you wanted from your stay? For backing my claim as Lord of Winterfell? Nothing else?" "I wanted to get to know you better, to see Winterfell and see what sort of lord you'd be," Ariel admitted, heart beating a drum roll in her chest as Cregan once more glanced down to her lips. "To fulfill your duties to your princess?" "No," Ariel admitted. "For me." Ariel. Cregan's voice hushed, his pale eyes storming. "I wish I'd met you sooner. A week ago my thoughts were dark and ominous, from the cold of the road and uncertainty of what would await me in my own castle. But since we crossed paths in that tavern, nothing has been the same. You've brought magic and dragons and tale of strange lands. I got swept away in it." "I know the feeling," Ariel murmured. Cregan smiled, but it was a fleeting thing, replaced with something tight. "I cannot fathom how a lady as charming and rare as you is not promised yet," he said, searching her face. "And I very much wish we would have met sooner." The implications in his regretful tone took hold, sparking a sudden suspicion that blindsided her. Why hadn't she expected it though? This was the north, but it was still Westeros, and here Cregan was old enough. She'd known many younger. He sighed and came clean. "I'm betrothed." Ariel's emotions had been bubbly with uncertain giddiness, but at the confirmation it was like nosediving into an ice bath. "Fuck!" "I've been for a year," Cregan said quickly. The butterflies in her stomach hadn't had time to land before being smacked to death violently with a bat. The disappointment shouldn't have stung as badly as it did. They'd known each other for less than a week. It was ridiculous, except it wasn't. Not here. Maybe she shouldn't have read this much into Cregan's behavior back home, but here it was different. Or maybe Cregan wasn't the only one who'd been swept away. "Oh." Ariel had so many thoughts in her head, yet couldn't think of a single decent reply. What was there to say? "Congratulations? Who is she? Do you like her? Do you even know her? Does she have a dragon? So, will you marry her?" Ariel closed her eyes, feeling the mortification of letting something so dumb sounding out of her mouth. Betrothals usually led to marriages, moron. "I mean, during your name day feast, since it was... You said your family wanted you to get married, and you've already betrothed. It sounds like the matter is solved for you already." Ariel rambled, finding it easier to speak as she focused on the raven nearby instead. "No," Cregan said firmly. "Not yet. Ara is 4 and 10, too young. It was agreed to wait until she's come of age." Ariel nodded, very relieved she wouldn't be watching him get married in 3 days. "I see. Great. I mean, not that you have to wait, but that she'll be old. I don't mean old, I mean of age." Ariel needed to exit. Could she jump over the bridge railing, or was that too dramatic? "I think I will... I need..." All she really needed was space. "Need to put this in water." Ariel gestured to the winter rose, only preserved from succumbing to the cold by some light magic. He held up his elbow as if to escort her back. "I'll manage by myself. Thank you, Lord Cregan." Ariel turned around, leaving Cregan by the railing. Mind jumbled with relief to get away. Her frustration and how foolish she felt. Though she'd barely gotten halfway down to the bridge before she rolled back to Cregan, almost squishing her winter rose in her fist and blurting, "I wish you told me a little sooner." I should have, Dragon conceded, looking like a kicked puppy instead of the intimidating wolf she was more familiar with. For regardless of his oversight, I will remain until I see you installed as Lord of Winterfell. You will? I'm not that fickle, Ariel said, and mustered up a smile. It took effort. And I've been promised roasted goat and a feast. How can I miss that?